Have you ever caught yourself wondering how something as important as a vaccine, especially one meant for a virus that flipped our world upside down, could be developed, tested, and approved in record time? Maybe you sat in the clinic, sleeve rolled up, and thought, is this really safe? Or are we moving too fast? You're not alone in that thought. It's something millions of people have asked themselves since the first COVID-19 vaccines were rolled out. After all, in a world where most vaccines take 10 to 15 years to develop, the COVID shots made it from lab bench to injection in under a year. That kind of speed would raise anyone's eyebrows, even if you're someone who completely trusts science. Today, we're going to take a closer look at what really happened behind the scenes. We'll explore whether the FDA's approval process for COVID vaccines was rushed or simply a well-coordinated effort to save lives. We're going to talk about how vaccines are usually tested and approved, what was different this time, and whether safety was sacrificed for speed. You'll walk away with a clearer understanding, not just opinions, but context and facts that can help you feel more confident about the choices you make for your health. Let's begin with something we can all relate to: trust. Trust in the people we depend on to make decisions about our safety. That includes doctors, public health agencies, and yes, the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA. This agency is responsible for making sure that anything from your morning vitamins to life-saving cancer drugs is both safe and effective. They're not perfect, but their process has been refined over decades, and most of us rely on them whether we realize it or not. Now, when COVID hit, the world didn't just pause, it panicked. Hospitals filled, economies stalled, and every headline screamed numbers that made the future feel uncertain. It was a race against time, and researchers, pharmaceutical companies, and health agencies jumped into that race with everything they had. But here's where it gets interesting. Usually, vaccine development follows a pretty slow, cautious path. It starts in the lab, then moves through several phases of trials. Small groups, then larger ones, then diverse populations to really see how it performs in different people. These phases can take years, sometimes decades, and that's before a single dose even makes it to the pharmacy shelf. Once all that's done, the company submits its data to the FDA, which then spends months, sometimes more, reviewing it before giving the green light. So how did the COVID vaccines make it through all of that in less than a year? One of the biggest changes was something called Emergency Use Authorization, or EUA for short. It's a tool the FDA can use in a public health crisis. When time is short and the risk is high, the FDA can authorize a product if the potential benefits clearly outweigh the risks, even if full data isn't yet available. Think of it like allowing firefighters into a burning building before the safety inspection is complete. It's not ideal, but the alternative might be far worse. This doesn't mean the vaccines skipped safety testing. In fact, COVID vaccines went through all 3 phases of clinical trials, just like any other vaccine would. What changed was the timeline. Instead of waiting months between each phase, companies ran some phases in parallel. And because COVID was so widespread, it didn't take long to find enough participants and see enough cases to evaluate the vaccine's impact. Everything was sped up, not skipped. But let's pause here for a moment. Speed, even with good intentions, can create blind spots. Just like driving fast in the rain might get you home quicker, but you could miss something important on the road. That's the concern many people had. If we rushed these vaccines, did we miss something important? It's a valid question, and the truth is nuanced. While no major safety steps were skipped, long-term data by definition takes time. We simply couldn't know in 2020 what might happen 5 years down the road, because 5 years hadn't passed. That's true for any new treatment, but in this case, it became a hot-button issue. People were asked to trust a process that was still unfolding in real time. Now, let's talk about transparency, because this is where the FDA sometimes stumbles. While the vaccine trial data was published and reviewed by outside experts, the pace and pressure of the situation led many to feel like decisions were being made behind closed doors. Add in the politicization of the pandemic, conflicting news reports, and social media rumors, and suddenly trust becomes a lot harder to hold on to. But even with all this pressure, the FDA maintains some key standards. For instance, the minimum threshold for effectiveness was set at 50%, meaning the vaccine had to reduce the risk of COVID by at least half. The initial vaccines far exceeded that. And safety monitoring didn't stop at approval. Systems like VIRS and the vSafe app were launched to track side effects in the real world, in real time. Still, that doesn't mean it was all smooth sailing. Concerns about rare side effects, especially heart inflammation in younger males and blood clotting in some vaccines, led to temporary pauses and further investigation. That's the system doing what it's supposed to do, finding issues early and responding quickly. But for the public, it often just looked like chaos. So now, we're left with a question that doesn't have a one-size-fits-all answer. Were the FDA's actions justified? Or were they too fast, too loose, and too political? That's what we're going to continue exploring, because understanding the full picture requires us to look deeper. We'll go into the approval process, what data was used, and how the FDA balances urgency with caution when public safety is on the line.
When you really stop and think about it, the FDA wasn't just making a call on a vaccine, they were making a call on how we'd all live our lives. Could we safely visit our parents again? Go to work without fear? Let our kids go back to school? That kind of responsibility weighs heavy, and while the emergency authorization helped bring vaccines to the public faster, it also brought a wave of confusion and hesitation. And let's be honest, medical information can feel overwhelming. It's not always easy to know who to believe. For some folks, the words FDA approved bring comfort and clarity. For others, it sounds like a rushed rubber stamp from a government body under pressure. So, how can we tell the difference between fast and careless? Let's take a moment to talk about what full FDA approval actually means. After the initial emergency use authorizations were granted in late 2020 and early 2021, companies like Pfizer and Moderna continued to gather data. They submitted more in-depth findings on how their vaccines performed over a longer stretch of time, across different age groups, and with more diverse populations. They had to demonstrate not only short-term safety and effectiveness, but also how the vaccines held up as the virus changed. That data didn't just land on one person's desk. It was reviewed by independent advisory panels made up of doctors, scientists, and public health experts with no ties to the companies producing the vaccines. These panels asked tough questions, combed through trial results, and made recommendations based on evidence, not politics. Only after passing through these layers of scrutiny could the vaccine earn full FDA approval. Now, this is where a lot of people got confused. If the vaccine was already in use and millions of people had received it, what was the point of full approval? And why did it take so long? Well, it's kind of like buying a house. You might move in based on an inspection report, but the full appraisal, checking the foundation, plumbing, roof, everything, comes later. It's a deeper dive to confirm that what looked good in the short term holds up under more intense examination. That's what the FDA did. Still, not everyone was convinced. And who can blame them? Between shifting guidance, new variants, and headlines that seemed to change by the hour, it's no wonder people were skeptical. One week we heard the vaccine would stop the virus in its tracks, the next we were told we'd need a booster, and then maybe another. It started to feel like the goalposts kept moving. But here's the thing, science is always evolving. That's a strength, not a weakness. As we learned more about how the virus spread, mutated, and impacted different people, health officials had to adjust the strategy. That's how good medicine works, it adapts to new information. Unfortunately, that flexibility can sometimes look like uncertainty. And in the middle of all that, the FDA had to make real-time decisions with the information they had. It wasn't perfect. There were missteps, mixed messages, and public frustration. But there were also millions of lives saved. Hospitalizations dropped dramatically once vaccines rolled out. Vulnerable populations, especially the elderly and immunocompromised, had a layer of protection they didn't have before. It's worth noting, too, that this wasn't just about American science. Around the world, health agencies were conducting their own reviews. Countries like Canada, the UK, and members of the European Union launched independent investigations into the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. And in nearly every case, the findings aligned. These vaccines were highly effective at preventing severe illness and death, especially in the early stages of the pandemic. Still, no treatment is 100% risk-free. Even aspirin, something millions of us take for heart health or pain relief, carries a risk of stomach bleeding or allergic reaction. So of course a brand new vaccine, delivered to billions of people in record time, came with questions. What's important is how those questions were handled. Were concerns dismissed or taken seriously? Were adverse reactions tracked and investigated? Were updates shared openly with the public? The answer, for the most part, is yes. Systems like VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, allowed people to report any unusual reactions, and that data was reviewed regularly. When patterns emerged, like the rare cases of myocarditis in young men, further studies were launched and guidance was updated. That's science doing its job. Unfortunately, those updates often came too late to stop misinformation. Once a false claim spreads online, it takes on a life of its own. One dramatic headline or viral post can undo months of careful communication. And in a world where many people get their news from social media, that's a real problem. But here's something worth holding onto. You don't need to be a scientist to understand the basics of safety and risk. You just need good, clear information and a little space to think for yourself. No one should be pressured or shamed into a health decision. At the same time, it's okay to change your mind as new facts come to light. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. So as we continue unpacking what really happened with the FDA's COVID vaccine approval process, keep this in mind: there's no shame in asking questions. In fact, asking thoughtful questions is one of the best things you can do for your health. Whether you were first in line for the vaccine or you're still weighing your options, this conversation isn't about pointing fingers. It's about learning what went right, what could have gone better, and what we can do next time to make things clearer for everyone. Let's take a step back for a moment and talk about something that's often overlooked: how trust is built or broken during a crisis. When people feel like they're being told what to do without being told why, it creates resistance. That's true whether you're dealing with medicine, government decisions, or even just a conversation with your family. Most folks don't want to be preached to, they want to be heard. They want to feel like their concerns matter, like their questions aren't being brushed aside. One of the biggest hurdles the FDA and public health leaders faced during the COVID vaccine rollout wasn't just the science, it was communication. Many people weren't against vaccines in general. They just felt overwhelmed by the pace of everything, the changing recommendations, the back and forth on masks and boosters. It felt like the rules shifted faster than anyone could keep up. That's where transparency becomes so important. If the FDA had consistently taken the time to explain each decision in everyday language, not scientific jargon or legal speak, it could have made a world of difference. Instead of simply announcing, "This vaccine is now approved," imagine hearing, "Here's what we learned over the past 6 months, and here's why we now believe this vaccine meets our gold standard for safety." That's a message people can understand and respect, even if they're still unsure. And that brings us to something even bigger than COVID: how we move forward. Because this won't be the last time we face a fast-moving health crisis. Whether it's another virus, a new treatment, or an unexpected outbreak, the systems we rely on will need to respond quickly again. So what can we learn from this chapter? First, we need better access to reliable information. Not just from government agencies, but from community doctors, nurses, pharmacists, the people we already trust. If you're more likely to believe your local pharmacist than a federal official on TV, you are not alone. Trust is built locally, and we should lean into that. Second, we should normalize being cautious without being afraid. It's okay to ask for more time, to say, "I want to see a little more data before I decide." That's not anti-science. That's responsible. The problem isn't healthy skepticism. The problem is when it turns into fear fueled by false claims. And third, we need to remember that no system is perfect, not even the FDA. Mistakes can happen. But when systems own those mistakes, learn from them, and improve, that's when progress is made. That's when people start to feel safe again, not because they're told to, but because they choose to. Now, let's talk about personal choice for a minute. During the pandemic, We saw families, friends, even entire communities torn apart by disagreements over vaccines. That's not what public health should be about. It should be about empowering people with the best information available and supporting them as they make decisions that align with their own health and values. For many people, the decision to get vaccinated was easy. They felt the risks of COVID were too high to wait. For others, it took time, conversations, and more data. And yes, some people decided against it altogether. Rather than judging those choices, what if we focused on listening and learning? What if we recognized that the rush wasn't just about the vaccine itself, it was about fear, urgency, and a desperate need to return to normal life? When we look back at how quickly the vaccines were developed, it's nothing short of remarkable. Scientists around the world collaborated at a speed we've never seen before. Years of research on other coronaviruses gave them a head start. Global funding poured in. Volunteers lined up for clinical trials. And technology like mRNA, which had been quietly in development for decades, finally had its moment. But speed alone doesn't guarantee safety. What does guarantee safety is rigorous testing, ongoing monitoring, and a willingness to adjust course when needed. That's the part we need to get better at communicating. Speed was a tool, not a shortcut. And for the most part, it worked. Now, as we shift into a new phase of this conversation, the question isn't just, was the FDA too fast? It's, how can we make the process more trustworthy for everyone without sacrificing the science? That's the real challenge. Because vaccines are just one part of public health. We also need to rebuild trust, encourage open dialogue, and prepare for what's next. And maybe that starts with something as simple as this: giving people room to be curious without shaming them. Admitting when we don't have all the answers. Valuing truth over control. If we can do that, we'll be in a much better place next time and every time after. So wherever you landed on the vaccine debate, whether you were first in line or still figuring things out, your voice matters. Your experience matters. And your right to ask questions and seek honest answers should never be taken away. If this conversation helped you feel a little more informed, or even just a little more seen, go ahead and share your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep this dialogue going. And if you think others in your life could use a thoughtful breakdown like this, send it their way. The more we talk openly, the stronger we all get. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like it and subscribe for more grounded, honest, and easy to understand discussions on health, science, and the big questions we're all trying to navigate. Here's to making decisions with clarity, confidence, and compassion. We're all in this together, and better conversations are just the beginning.